I am going to be kind of kicking things off by speaking for a few minutes about textile waste as a public health equity issue and the need for a political and structural response. And I will describe in just a minute kind of the reason we wanted to start with this presentation and kind of why I am the one giving it. Okay, so just before I kind of get into the few points that I want to share in this presentation, just to offer like a little 1 minute information about me, because so you have more idea where I'm coming from and where my thoughts on things are coming from. My name is Dielle, as I said before. I use she, her, or ze, here pronouns. I am a PhD student at the University of Washington School of Public Health, but I also do work with the Boston University School of Public Health. I'm the project manager at the Aftermath Learning Lab at Boston College, and I'm also the grants director for one of the community partners of this event, Make Fashion Clean. And so really kind of how I think about things and what motivates the work and stuff that I do in my personal and professional life is really not related to environmental health. Most of my research and work is about ableism and intersecting structural determinants of health that cause health disparities for disabled people and other minoritized populations. But my research, kind of stepping back more broadly, is really focused on measuring and thinking about structural determinants of health and approaching health inequities as systemic and political problems. And just in terms of my identities, I know who we are really shapes how we think about things and how we show up in rooms. So just for transparency, I'm a white, disabled, neurodivergent, transgender woman. I am a US citizen who grew up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, and I have spent formative periods of my life living in Boston, Massachusetts, and Greater Accra, Ghana, and I now live in Seattle, Washington. So this presentation is going to be pretty brief, but I do have a very specific goal for it. As I kind of mentioned, I am not an expert in environmental health. We will be hearing from several presenters today who have a lot more expertise, knowledge, and lived experience related to environmental health and research, innovation, and activism around textile waste. But my goal with these introductory remarks is to really just present a simple framing of textile waste from a public health and health equity lens. Because kind of for whatever reason, textile waste is talked about in a lot of different ways from a lot of different perspectives. But it is not frequently talked about or not talked about as much as I think it needs to be from a public health framing. And I think there is a lot of value in terms of looking at this issue from that perspective. So kind of the 4 key ideas of this presentation that I want to communicate is that number 1, textile waste has public health impacts. Number 2, textile waste is a health equity issue. Number 3, that the drivers of textile waste are structural in nature. And number 4, that because of that, we need political and structural solutions. This is kind of the reason why I'm giving this presentation to start things off, because this is really the sort of ideas that led to the creation of this event and the sort of conversations we're hoping to have here today. So I'm just going to review a few pieces of key research in each of those areas. So starting with textile waste as a public health issue with public health impacts. There is an increasing amount of research on this topic, and I think even in just a few years from now, we're going to know a lot more about exactly what the health impacts of textile waste are. But just to capture what are some of the things that are known right now, one of the biggest potential sources of pollution and sources of textile waste potentially negatively impacting health is that when textiles end up in landfills or open air dumps, they decompose. And when they decompose, chemicals that are kind of ingrained in the textiles during production, manufacturing, can leach off into the groundwater and into fresh water. And so these are just some quotes from research that has been showing, or that has been looking at how there are a lot of potentially very toxic metallic compounds that are used in the making of textiles. And so when this kind of leachate emerges, it contains a lot of these potential toxins, which can also coincidentally enter the bloodstream when we're wearing them. At the end of this presentation, there will be a reference list to all of the research that I am citing here. But I just wanted to point out another recent study that basically looked at, so all of these toxins that are being generated, what is their impact on living organisms? And so they basically exposed fish to textile leachate, and they found that these chemicals really created a lot of changes to the organisms, ranging from changes in gene expression to metabolism of chemical substances to behavioral changes. And the reason I included this little infographic under the quote here is they looked at different materials, denim, sportswear, and towels. And what they found is that there's really different impacts across different products. And then just some other environmental health effects that have been studied and named, and I think really speak to public textile waste being a public health issue, is that there's a pretty large body of evidence that is showing that air pollution around landfills is really substantial and has negative impacts on health. Secondly, that the decomposition of textiles, especially natural fibers, results in greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide and methane, which contribute to climate change. And then just on a really kind of practical level, textile waste can clog rivers, greenways, and parks and contribute to flooding and other environmental disasters. And then briefly, I just wanted to mention microplastics. I think they're a topic that will come up today in our presentations, but this is a topic that is increasingly being talked about and researched. Just the idea that when we wash textiles, especially synthetic textiles, a really large amount of tiny fibers enter the water and slowly make their way to the ocean, where organisms consume them. And they appear to be having some pretty big impacts on the health of those organisms. So kind of moving from establishing textile waste as a public health issue to more of a health equity issue. And what I mean by that is health equity issue refers to kind of a public health issue that affects different populations in different ways and unevenly. And so this is just a graph from a piece of research that our team at the Aftermath Learning Lab published, I believe in 2021. And we looked at textile waste generation in the state of Florida, and we compared counties where there was a higher average median or a higher median income and counties with a lower median income. And as you can see in the figure on this slide, which just shows some kind of bars for each of those groups, the amount of textile waste being generated per person in wealthier areas is substantially higher in the United States than in communities with lower incomes. And I think why this is a real issue for equity is when we look at the location of solid waste facilities in the US, we see almost the exact opposite pattern, with solid waste facilities being significantly more likely to be located in areas with lower median house values, and nearly 3 times as likely to be located in communities with more than 50% people of color, which really kind of highlights that this issue is not just an issue of inequity, but potentially also of environmental racism. And we saw similar patterns to that when we looked at this in the Florida data. So then kind of moving from just the US perspective, a huge kind of theme of our conference today is going to be the movement of textiles from the global north to the global south through the secondhand clothing industry. This is a very complicated kind of process that has a lot of complex impacts. And so what we as a lab wanted to do is we just wanted to look at trade data and try to get a sense of how much textile waste is being transferred from the global north to the south and kind of where specifically it is going. And so these results are not published yet. Hopefully they will be published pretty soon. But what we found is that 78 billion pounds of used textiles were sent from the global north to the global south over 20 years. And the amount sent increased really massively over those 2 decades, about 234% increase in the amount sent. And this is just one figure that shows a few specific countries that send a lot of textiles to other places. That in the United States, South Korea, United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, the amount of textile waste being sent has increased pretty substantially over this period. So finally, just a few more small points before we kind of head to the next section of our presentation and really get into things. I wanted to draw attention to the fact that the causes of textile waste are really structural in nature. And this graph that I'm showing on the left is a very informal analysis, and I apologize for not getting something a little bit more formal, but what it shows is just the market size of the global apparel industry has increased really substantially over the last 10 years. And then in the graph on the right, what we see is that the amount of textile waste generated, this graph is specific to the United States, but I think the same pattern can be observed in a lot of countries in the global north, that the amount of textile waste being generated is occurring, continuing to grow right alongside that. So I think we would be remiss to not name that textile waste is being caused and driven by fast fashion and by kind of patterns of consumption around textile waste that have become kind of normalized. And kind of another idea that is being explored a lot right now, and I think will be explored in various ways during this conference, is waste colonialism. And what's on the screen here is just a definition of that from an organization called the Ore Foundation, which is based in Ghana and is doing a lot of advocacy and work around the dumping of textiles in Ghana. And I'm not going to go into too much detail to this term because I think there are people from the Global South who have written about it with a lot of nuance. And so I'll really just refer you to those resources. But the idea of waste colonialism is kind of a group of people using waste and pollution to control another group of people or their land, and essentially use another country or community's land to dispose of their waste. And so if you're kind of interested in more of that framing, the Ore Foundation has a great document and a number of resources where they include a lot of different perspectives on waste colonialism, which you can access at this link. So finally, just to kind of wrap up my introductory remarks here, because these problems are really structural in nature, they stem from fast fashion, they stem from waste colonialism that are really deeply ingrained systems in our society. The solutions, at least from our perspective at the Aftermath Learning Lab, we think that the solutions, or at least part of the solutions, are going to need to be structural and political in nature too. And so what we wanted to highlight here was just that there really are an increasing number of structural and political responses to textile waste that are being discussed. And so just kind of building on the last slides from the Ore Foundation, this is another little screenshot from their website where they talk about their proposal for extended producer responsibility, which is essentially a policy at a very high level that holds producers responsible for disposing of the waste that they produce. And what's unique about the Orr Foundation's proposal is there's really a lens of global accountability, making sure that there's reparations and money going to the communities most impacted, especially in the global South. So that's kind of one policy that's receiving a lot of attention right now. Another policy that has received a lot of attention over the last 5 years or so are textile waste bans in multiple parts of the world, but especially in East Africa. Several East African countries, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, and Burundi, all passed legislation sometime around 2016 to try to reduce the amount of textile imports entering the country. And the reason for this was mostly discussed as being about economic opportunity for the local textile industry, but environmental issues, dignity, cultural factors that people shouldn't be forced to wear used clothes. There should be a robust local textile industry creating kind of traditional and culturally relevant clothes have kind of all been topics that have been discussed. But then on the other side, there have been people who have been arguing that there's also a lot of jobs within the recycling industry, and that needs to be considered. And so when this was proposed, the US threatened retaliation under the Trump administration to remove these countries from the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act as a response. And so some countries reversed, Rwanda didn't, and then some ended up implementing this policy due to COVID under the kind of rationale that there were risks associated with bringing textiles into a country that might spread COVID. And then the final policy I wanted to highlight was something in the US, in the state of Massachusetts. There is a textile disposal ban that went into effect. I think it's been in effect for about a year now. And so this is just a graphic from the kind of associated campaign around that, which is about do not put in recycling or trash, take textiles to a drop-off location. And so this policy is really trying to keep textile waste out of landfills in the US. But I think an important question and something we can think about today is if textile wastes are being diverted from landfills in the global north, where are they going? And is there a potential that they're going to end up in other places, particularly in countries that maybe don't have as many landfills with the same safety and containment features that help to contain the environmental pollutants. And sorry, one more policy, the Fabric Act. I just wanted to highlight it. It's not really about textile waste, but it's really considered one of the first attempts in the US to regulate the fashion and clothing industry. So the fact that it has been proposed is a pretty big step. So just in terms of main takeaways from these introductory remarks, the 4 key ideas that I and we as a group wanted to hit on is that textile waste has public health impacts. Textile waste is a health equity issue. The drivers of textile waste are structural, and we need political and structural solutions. And so as we transition very soon into our program and into our presentations and our hackathon, we wanted to highlight that it really is clear that more structural solutions to textile waste are being proposed than ever before. However, many of these ideas are not quite politically feasible yet and will probably require mobilization to gain popular support. And also that there's a need for equity and continued attention to equity in these solutions. And so 2 guiding questions for us just as we enter the conference is, how can we work to build political will for structural solutions to textile waste while also still investing in personal and community efforts? And then secondly, how do we come to a consensus around the best solutions, especially of the structural and political nature to textile waste when there's an increasing number of proposals and some may be more or less relevant to specific contexts? So the LEAPS conference today is a space for us to consider these questions, to talk about them. And we really couldn't be happier that you've chosen to join us today for these conversations.